Today's lesson is going to be on solving quadratics by completing the square. Our objective, obviously, is to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. This is a method that you can do with any quadratic, but we are only going to use this method when the a value is 1 and the b value is even. So again, completing the square is a method of solving quadratics where you are making the quadratic a perfect square trinomial. Remember that a perfect square trinomial, a PST, has 3 terms, begins and ends with a perfect square. Perfect square trinomials will factor like this. If we have x squared plus 8x plus 16, you can see that it begins and ends with a perfect square. So it would be x plus 4 squared, which is the same as x plus 4 times x plus 4. And you can see there's your x squared. 4x and 4x gives you the 8x. And 4 times 4 gives you 16. Second example here, we have x squared minus 10x plus 25. Again, this sign always needs to be positive, but this means that both signs must be negative. So therefore, this would factor to be x minus 5 squared. This value is half of the b in each case. Completing the square is a process of starting with an expression like x squared plus 4x and adding something to it to make it a perfect square trinomial. So adding 4 to this makes this x squared plus 4x plus 4, there's the adding of 4, which now would factor to be x plus 2 squared, which again means the same thing as x plus 2 times x plus 2. When this is FOILed again, we have x squared, 2x and 2x gives you the 4x, and 2 times 2 gives you the 4. That positive tells me both signs must be positive. So to complete the square, we are going to add half of b divided by 2, half of b squared. So here are some examples. X squared plus 8x. We're going to take half of b, half of 8 is 4, and 4 squared is 16. So we would add 16. It would then factor to be x plus 4 squared. If I have x squared plus 10x, half of 10 is 5, 5 squared is 25. That's now a perfect square trinomial. It would factor to be x plus 5 squared. X squared plus 6x, half of b is 3, 3 squared is 9. How would it factor? It'd be x plus 3 squared. X squared minus 12x, half of b is a negative 6, but a negative 6 squared is a positive 36. How would this factor? It would be x minus 6 squared. X squared minus 20x plus 10. Half of negative 20 is a negative 10. Negative 10 squared is a positive 100. And that would factor to be x minus 10 squared. As you can see, again, this number is always half of the b, and then this is half of b squared. So how do we use this method to solve a quadratic? So if I give you this quadratic equation, and like we said, we're only going to use this method when a is 1, so a is 1 here, and b is even, b is 10. So the first thing I just make sure is that it's not already a perfect square trinomial. And 11's not a perfect square, it's definitely not 1. So what I'll do is I'll add 11 to both sides. And so I'm left with x squared plus 10x, I'll leave a little space, equals 11. And then we complete the square. We add 25 to this, because that's half of b, half of 10 is 5, 5 squared is 25. And what you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other, so we add 25 here. So then, this is a perfect square trinomial. It would factor to be x plus 5 squared. On this side, I have 11 plus 25, which is 36. Then, I would take the square root of both sides. The square root cancels out the squared. The square root of 36 is going to be positive and negative 6. And I'm left with x plus 5 on the left side. Then I just subtract 5 from both sides. And x is going to equal positive and negative 6 minus 5. Two solutions. I have positive 6 minus 5 would be positive 1. And then I have a negative 6 minus 5, which would be a negative 11. Those would be my two solutions. Another example, we've got x squared plus 6x minus 7 equals 0. You can see the a value is 1, the b value is 6, so it is even. So completing the square is a good method here. First thing I do is just add this 7 over, leaving myself a space. I complete the square. I take half of 6, which is 3, and 3 squared is 9, and I add this to both sides. This is now a perfect square trinomial, which factors to be x plus 3 squared. 7 plus 9 is 16. Square root both sides, cancels the square root. End up with x plus 3 equals a positive and negative 4. I subtract 3 from both sides. And I end up with a positive and negative 4 minus 3. Positive 4 minus 3 is 1. A negative 4 minus 3 is negative 7. And those are my two solutions. And again, just stressing, we're only going to use this method when a is 1 and b is even. You can use this method in all cases, but it's much simpler when a is 1 and b is even. So here's another example. I would check and make sure this is not a perfect square trinomial. It's not. It almost is, because 25 is a perfect square. But then this would have to be a negative 10. So my first step, subtract 25 from both sides. Then I'm going to complete the square. Half of negative 6 is 3. Negative 3 and negative 3 squared is 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And I end up with x minus 3 squared equals a negative 25 plus 9 is a negative 16. I take the square root of both sides, which gives me just x minus 3. And I have the square root of a negative 16, which, remember, is a positive and negative 4i. Then I'll add 3 to both sides. So I have 3 plus or minus 4i. For this particular problem, that is your final solution. One of them is 3 plus 4i, and the other one is 3 minus 4i. Another example, 4x squared plus 8x minus 10. If you look at this, you could take a 2 out of everything. If you did, you'd have 2x squared plus 4x minus 5 is 0. But this still doesn't help it, because a is not 1. So I'm not going to use completing the square as a method for doing this one. So let's do a different example. Let's say we've got x squared minus 12x minus 7 equals 0. So right away, it's not a perfect square trinomial, so I'm going to add 7 to both sides. Then I'm going to complete the square. That's when I go half of b is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is a positive 36. And what I add to one side, I must add to the other. Then, completing the square, I'd have x minus 6 squared. 7 plus 36 is 43. I take the square root of both sides. That would be a positive and negative root of 43. Now in this case, I don't know what the square root of 43 is. I'm just going to leave it. I am going to add 6. And so my two solutions would be 6 plus or minus the square root of 43. Those would be my two solutions. Hope this video helps. Please rewind, redo them, look through the examples step by step, and then use this to complete the worksheet that's found in your Schoology folder.